I'm going to start with differing a little bit from you when you said that we have to be impartial. I will not be impartial. Primarily because I think we do need to lean into our kinds of biases. And I'm going to heavily lean into mine, which is gender. That doesn't mean you don't bring your analytical lens into it. Obviously, you have to look at the budget, not just from a point of view of what the numbers say, because you can look at the same numbers and come up with very different stories. The question is, what is your analytical question? What are you saying? What are you looking at? Because the budget is not, as Madhusudan, who has taught me whatever I know about budgets, it's not just a list, a table with numbers in it. It is also about planning, which he's spoken very sort of significantly on. It is also it is about accountability. It is what are you prioritizing, and so it is a view into the state's priorities. And you must actually also, if you're students of economics, must look at least as I do. I'm not an economist, so I sound very far away from this world, but it matters as much to me as it matters to any one of you. And so only not students of economics, but as citizens, because that's one of the foundational identities all of you have. And as a citizen, whether you are of whatever gender, so when I say gender, I don't mean women. Please make that very clear. Gender primarily means for me a space of engagement of how do you look at differences, how do you look at power, and who is this budget? What is this budget? Who is it doing for? Who is being influenced by this? Now, for the sake of argument, let's assume that I only look, because I have only 10 minutes. I've been given strict sort of orders to, I suppose some of you are still already nodding off. So make that very quick before you go into deep slumber. We will try and look at only women. Let's just only look at women, and how, for example, how someone who's not an economist looks at this number and finds difference, finds inequality. Okay. Now, technically, if you look at the budget document, it's very clear that from the narrative, the budget is on the poor, the youth, women, and farmers. Absolutely. These are absolute good priorities. In principle, these are actually one of the four categories of people we must all care about. Now, one of them is very centrally you, right? You're the youth, right? Now, how do you find yourselves in the budget is something that I think all of you should actually look at. Where do you find yourselves? Now, I'm going to look at one, because my mandate was women. And I'm doing the gender budget of women, but I also encourage you to do a similar exercise for yourselves. Where are your interests lie in the budget? Okay. Now, very quickly, if you look at the GBS statement, which is a gender budgeting statement, which is not the same thing as a GRB, which is a gender responsive budgeting, you'll see, actually, if you look at the newspapers, you'll see many positive trends. Increasing in budgets, working women hostels, who wouldn't want that? Hostels and creches, loans for drones, because that's so catchy. One, it's got loans in it, one, it's got drones in it, and it matches. So, but when you look at very closely how this gender budget actually, budget numbers have increased, you'll see that basically two allocations have added to the gender budget, basically caused the increase. The NRLM and Jal Jeevan Mission, which was in another place, has moved into another place. That's all. It's a nice, lovely accounting exercise. It actually doesn't speak to higher allocations as much as it is a simple sort of a shift in numbers. It's a very nice accounting exercise. You must look at it. Now, essentially what this is that what was termed Part B, which there's a gender budget Part A and Part B, has now moved to Part A. But forget the gender budget as a way to look at, I mean, that's not the only way, by the way, to look at a gender budget of the union budget. You can look at other things. I'm going to look at four things: employment and entrepreneurship. Now, oftentimes, when we talk about labor force participation, and you must have encountered it, we are very concerned about workforce participation of women. Very, very concerned. It's going up, it's going low. It's what is the reasons for going up, going low? Is it because of social norms? Is it because of labor market distributions? What is it? But what we're really sort of not focusing on is that women who are participating have very low quality jobs and are paid extremely low. So any one of you who goes into the labor market, I can tell you that women are being paid 70 paisa to a rupee on, I'm saying it's an underestimation. In the rural areas, that is almost 50%. That is, if a woman is being paid 100 rupees for daily wage, a man is being paid more than 200. Now, in that job market, you are also trying to see how to improve improving working conditions. For example, if you just go out into the street and you look at women working on the street, right outside, street vendors. I'm assuming at some point you're very close to the garment factory workers, but sanitation workers, informal waste pickers, all of them are working in extremely difficult situations without any access to toilets, any access to shade, any access to any kind of facilities that would make them safe on the streets. But so the thing is, you have women working in the streets, you have women's workforce participation, but you have provided absolutely no social protection for any of them, and not even like basic facilities like toilets. And all of you who have traveled, right? That's all of the women. Do you ever use a public toilet? Nobody, right? No one. Even if there are, you don't use them, right? So what that means is that our public infrastructure, no matter how much we talk about it, does not cater to, at this moment, in this room, more than 70% of the population. At the moment. That's something to really think about, especially when you're looking at the gender budget numbers. Okay. Now, the second thing is, if you look at the gender budget statement, WCD, which is the Women's and Women and Child Development, does not even feature in it. That's how much priority women and child development has in the gender budget document. Please remember the irony of this. Okay. Now, I absolutely feel that women entrepreneurship should be encouraged. It's one of the biggest things in the union budget that everyone actually talks about. There's been a lot of conversations around women's skills and women's entrepreneurship. But actually, as Professor Naveen was saying, there is a space for failure. The song was beautifully sort of evocative of it, that when you actually invest in an entrepreneurship, you're assuming not 100% success, right? That would be, as students of statistics, that would be very, I think, erroneous, right? So you're assuming, for example, that every woman who sort of creates an entrepreneurship has to succeed. Now, that's statistically not possible. What that means is, if one fails, let's assume you've taken these loans. You've tried to create, at the very least, a tailoring shop, which is, oftentimes what else will women do? They'll tailor. Right? Those are the kinds of, by the way, skilling, if you look at the skilling programs that are directed towards women, highly feminized, beauty, tailoring, right? There is no such thing on, the skills on drones is absolutely wonderful, except that that's actually like a sort of a tiny drop in terms of the diversification of job skillings that are targeted towards women. And the thing is, a lot of these are extremely, informal, two, very low paid. They're not necessarily like, for example, if you do in a village, and this is actually coming from our field, and one of the things that our former director liked to quote, if you do a tailoring course for 20 women in a village, who is going to go to these? Who are the customers? How many customers can a village of, let's assume, 120 have for 20 tailors? So there is no diversification, there is no job creation in any form. And what you have is daily labor. And then you're saying, let's empower women to become entrepreneurs, because that's a nice little word, but does not actually take into consideration the kinds of risks that come from it, and the fact that they have absolutely no social protection to rely on if they fail. Now, the second thing, which I think a lot of people forget, is everyone has heard of time poverty studies. Can you lift your hand if you ever have? Okay, very important to understand is that women, time poverty studies are essentially When you look at the time that you have for women to do productive labor, and actually it's not just related to productive labor, but if you look at the scale of time for men and the scale of time for women in terms of what they do on an everyday, on a 24-hour cycle, you realize that women are active in much more of one, care work, unpaid work. Care work is sort of part of household. So cooking, cleaning, because cooking, cleaning is not for some abstract concept. It is for family, right? Oftentimes it is for family that you're doing. If you look at your own, actually, if you do your own family time index of how many women work unpaid and how many, actually, just look at this, the time that women work versus the time men work, you will find astonishing amount of detail. I mean, astonishing amount of difference. The other thing you will remember is that care work time has moved very little in the last 20 years. That is, you may have had great advancements in terms of women's workforce participation, but the amount of hours that they're doing care work has not diminished. So, what that means is, and there's this beautiful book called The Double Shift, which I think everyone should at some point read, which is the foundation of this time poverty. But the thing is, women are already working on caregiving. They're working on unpaid labor in the farm or anywhere else. There, for example, when we think about crafts, right? You see this beautiful craftsperson. Someone is doing the dyeing. Someone is doing the so. In order to get to the loom, you need the thread and you need the dye. Someone is doing that. The weaver is not necessarily doing that, and oftentimes it is women who are doing that. So when we ask women to become entrepreneurs and fight for their rights and things like that, it's wonderful, but with what time? Because they have caregiving of the aged, the elderly, and everybody else. They also have to do unpaid care work, and they have to do entrepreneurship, and they have to make sure that if this entrepreneurship fails, they need a backup option. So one is to figure out, when we encourage entrepreneurship, what social security are we giving them? The second thing is, while we know that entrepreneurship actually has increased in the rural economy because women are quite diverse in trying to figure out, for example, goat pastoralism is actually small scale pastoralism is quite done. Actually, a lot of women do it. It has increased in the rural economy, but that doesn't mean they earn as much. And then I have a whole thing to be talking about the self-help groups, which again is seen as a panacea of all empowerment. So anything you do, you give it to an SHG group, except that one does not think about why. I mean, a simple question. A man, when he goes to a bank, does not need, apart from the usual sort of guarantors or the sort of the security, exactly, thank you. Security does not actually need to rely on anything else. But what we've created is an elaborate system whereby a woman in a rural economy, when she goes to the bank, has to prove that she belongs to a group of women who then have to also prove that they are financially worthy. This is not asked of any man ever in a banking system, but we do ask that of women. And why is that? Because the very simple thing is, they are not treated as equally as citizens. This is very simple. Now, what that also means is that SHG groups are the only way in which women actually are able to access credit. In that sense, this union budget has expanded that, but it's still, if you look at the mechanisms of it, it's still through SHGs, which I think is a problematic thing. Now, there are two problems with actually the entrepreneurship. One is, of course, the precarity of women's labor that I've already spoken about. But also, I think, gender wage gaps, disproportionate burden of urban unpaid and accounted work for. And then, of course, we also know that there is violence. And I don't mean the ones that are marking the streets of Calcutta. That happens also. That is one example of a range of experience of violence that happens to women. A major invisible kinds of violence that happens is exclusion. How many of you can think of walking on the streets at, I'll be very conservative, 11:30 in the night? Please raise your hands. No one's thinking of walking at 11:30 in the night? This is a campus. No? Outside in the streets? Nobody? Fine. I'll reduce it. 10 p.m. Outside, public spaces, public spaces. In campus is a bounded wall. I'm sure you're 10 p.m., 8 p.m., 3 a.m. Those are the, those don't sleep in the night. I can see. The reason why I did this very simple exercise, and you know this, right, much more than most, is that exclusion comes from the specific ways in which we exclude ourselves as well. When you do not walk in the streets, for example, the women who have to work, and you're very close to Pina, so I'll take that example. Garment workers have to engage in public transportation at 2 a.m., at 11:30, at 10 p.m. When you exclude yourself from that space, it becomes much more dangerous for them. And the reason why you exclude yourselves from the street is because there is no facility, right? You don't have public transportation. The public buses don't come on this Nagasandra road, right? They don't. So all that garment workers here in Pina have is private transportation. So therefore, what happens is that when women are not able to participate as fully and as eagerly as citizens, there's a specific kind of violence that happens that is actually not even recognized in the budget. And I'm saying that that's a huge flaw. So essentially what I'm saying, and because I know I'm running out of time is, and I've not even gone into questions of education. I mean, scary, right? In this budget, you don't even have primary education mentioned. You don't have children mentioned. Secondary education, which is what all of you are doing. I'm not sure there are that many allocations. I mean, this is a youth-centric budget, right? I said four categories. We are still struggling with secondary schools for girls. We are still struggling with basic healthcare for women and girls. We have actually, see, the thing is the parity of girls, as you can see here, parity of girls in specific areas has improved. That doesn't quite, it's not quite the same thing in terms of translation to jobs either. So we have this beautiful internship positions that, you were talking about, but to me that just feels like cheap sort of internship labor. It doesn't feel like it's a roadway to some kind of careers and some kind of job creation. In any case, so essentially, when I looked at this, and so I want you to also take that lens. When I looked at this budget, I looked at it in 5 different ways. Mobility. Did it take care of mobility of everyone, all citizens? Did it take care of how to reduce the care work burden of all citizens? Did it take into consideration safety, access to public space, livelihoods, or financial independence? And to me, the answer is a very, dismal no. It did not. And so what we need is, one, obviously we need more investment in care infrastructure and services. This is a known thing. If you open an economic textbook, you will, I'm sure any textbook that speaks about the social sector, yes, we need investment in care infrastructure. We also, I think this is what Professor Madhusudan was also saying, that, we do need an investment in terms of our social sector spending. Again, nothing very groundbreaking here. And then there is also investment in basic education, nutrition, livelihoods, because for all groups, for all of these groups, the poor, the youth, the women, the farmers, this investment is actually crucial. If you don't do anything else and you do focus on this, it will be quite something. Now, the last thing I want to say, and so I feel like, some part of it is sort of the lip service to the larger problem at hand, the larger structural problem at hand. Because public policy is supposed to actually engage with the structural problems of inequality. It is not supposed to be just number crunching. It's not supposed to just move these numbers around so we look good, right? It is not that kind of statement. Now, so what I'm trying to say is that the budget has to be a political statement. It is one. We are all political creatures. You're social creatures. Man is a social animal. Yes. But you're also a political creature. You're a citizen. And therefore, you have to look not just as economic students, you have to look at it as a citizen, because the budget is a political statement. And therefore, it gives you insights into the political objectives and intentions of the government. And to me, I feel like the needs of the disenfranchised, the ones who are not present here, the ones who are this budget is supposed to be for, I don't think they find voice in this budget. And that's actually my long and short